He was on top of the world. Anthony Vance had it all: a thriving company, a beautiful mistress named Clara on his arm, and a quiet, unassuming wife at home. Today, he was bringing Clara to the biggest meeting of his life, a partnership with the elusive tech giant, Reed Innovations. He smirked, adjusting his $10,000 suit, thinking his wife Eliza was probably tending to her little garden charity at that very moment. The boardroom doors opened. The board members stood. The new CEO walked in. Anthony's blood turned to ice. It was Eliza. And she wasn't there to serve coffee. Anthony Vance lived in a world of polished glass and muted, expensive sounds. His penthouse on the 70th floor of the prestigious Sterling Tower in Chicago wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of his success. From here, the city looked like a circuit board, a complex system he had mastered. He was the CEO of Vance Cortec, a company he'd built from the ground up, a narrative he repeated so often he'd come to believe it himself. This morning, the stakes were higher than ever. "Clara, darling." "Less lipstick," he murmured, not looking up from his tablet. He was reviewing the financials for the last time. "This is business, not the opera." Clara Decker pouted, blotting her ruby-red lips on a napkin. "I'm your executive assistant, Anthony. I'm supposed to look impressive. Besides," she ran a manicured hand down his silk tie, "I am the opera." Anthony allowed himself a small, predatory smile. Clara was his latest and most expensive indulgence. She was sharp, ambitious, and utterly devoid of the one trait he'd come to despise in his wife: humility. His wife, Eliza. He glanced at the kitchen, where Eliza was quietly packing a small canvas bag. She was plain. Not in looks, necessarily. She had a quiet, classical beauty, but in her very essence. She wore simple slacks and a beige cardigan. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was packing, what was it? Books? Seed packets? He couldn't remember. "Big day for you, Eliza," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. "Another bake sale for the Reed Foundation?" Eliza turned, her face calm. The Reed Foundation was her project, a small local charity she'd started in her father's name. It did something with community gardens and literacy programs. Anthony found it quaintly pathetic. "Something like that, Anthony. We're finalizing a new community partnership. It's a big day for us, yes." "That's nice, honey. Wonderful." He turned back to Clara, straightening his tie. "Right, let's go. The car's waiting." He kissed Clara's cheek, a public display of ownership, and walked past Eliza, ruffling her hair as if she were a child. "Don't wait up, kitten. We'll be celebrating late." Eliza just watched him go, her expression unreadable. "Good luck, Anthony. You'll need it." He didn't hear her. He was already in the elevator, his arm around Clara's waist, his mind on the prize. The meeting was with Reed Innovations. They were the white whale of the tech world. They had emerged from obscurity 3 years ago, a venture capital firm with an uncanny, almost prescient ability to pick winners in biotech and sustainable energy. They were secretive, powerful, and, until recently, helmed by a reclusive board. Today, they were announcing their new CEO, and that new CEO was personally reviewing Vance Cortec's proposal for a massive billion-dollar merger. "You're nervous," Clara whispered, as the elevator to the 90th floor boardroom of the Kincaid building ascended. "I'm not nervous. I'm focused," Anthony snapped. "This deal makes me untouchable. It makes us untouchable." He envisioned the future, a bigger penthouse, a yacht, and finally, the simple, quiet divorce he'd been planning. He'd give Eliza the old country house. It was more her speed. They entered the boardroom. It was a cathedral of corporate power. A long obsidian table reflected the skyline. 4 board members, 2 men, 2 women, all in severe dark suits, were already seated. They looked at Anthony, and then at Clara, with a flicker of unified, cold appraisal. "Mr. Vance," one of the men, Mason Thorne, said. "And your assistant." "Clara Decker, my EA," Anthony said smoothly, sliding into a chair. "Ms. Decker is integral to our operations and fully briefed on the merger." Clara preened, opening her tablet, though she barely knew the difference between a stock option and a stock pot. "We are just waiting for our CEO," said a woman at the far end, Dr. Orris, who hadn't smiled. The tension was suffocating. Anthony felt a single drop of sweat trace a line down his back. This was it. Everything he had worked for, lied for, stolen for, led to this room. The main doors at the end of the boardroom opened with a faint hiss. "Apologies for the delay," said Mason Thorne, standing. The other board members rose in unison. "Please welcome our President and Chief Executive Officer." A woman walked in. She was not wearing a beige cardigan. She was wearing a custom-tailored dark teal suit that screamed power. Her hair, which he'd last seen in a messy ponytail, was styled in a sleek, severe bob that framed her face. A face now defined by a quiet, lethal confidence. She wore glasses. Not her simple reading ones, but sharp architectural frames. Anthony Vance's world, built on glass and steel, shattered. Clara, seeing his face, looked up from her tablet and whispered, "Anthony." "Who is that?" The woman reached the head of the table. She placed her leather satchel down and looked directly at him. Her eyes were not the soft, forgiving eyes he saw over the breakfast table. They were the eyes of a predator that had just cornered its prey. "Good morning, gentlemen. Dr. Orris," she said, her voice clear and ringing with authority. She then turned her gaze to Anthony, Mr. Vance, and Ms. Decker. An unexpected pleasure. Anthony's mouth was full of sand. He couldn't breathe. It's, he stammered. Eliza smiled, a thin, sharp gesture that held no warmth. "I believe you were expecting a Mr. Reed. He was my father. I am Eliza Reed, and this is my company." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was so profound that Anthony could hear the frantic, tinny beat of his own heart. Clara Decker's face had cycled through confusion, disbelief, and had now landed on a mask of pale, dawning horror. She looked from Eliza to Anthony and back again, the cogs in her pretty head grinding to a halt. "Eliza!" Anthony finally choked out, the name sounding foreign and heavy in his mouth. What is this? This is insane! A joke!" Eliza raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She looked at Mason Thorne, her board member. "Mason, did you vet Mr. Vance's company, personally?" Mason, a man Anthony had been trying to poach for 6 months, didn't even glance at him. "We did, Miss Reed. A full workup. The surface-level financials are strong. The debt-to-asset ratio is acceptable. But the core IP is where we found irregularities." "Irregularities," Eliza repeated, tasting the word. She sat down, gesturing for the rest of the board to follow. Anthony and Clara were left standing, 2 statues in a tomb. "Please, Mr. Vance, sit. And your assistant. We have so much to discuss." Anthony fell into his chair. Clara did the same, her movements stiff. "Let's begin your presentation," Eliza said, folding her hands on the table. Anthony stared. He fumbled for his tablet, his hands shaking so badly he could barely unlock it. "Eliza. Honey, we need to talk. I don't understand. I am Ms. Reed in this room, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel. "And you are a potential contractor, a very, very small one. Now, your presentation. You claim that Vance Cortex' primary asset, the Vance quantum encryption algorithm, is your own design. It is, Anthony said, his voice cracking. I designed it 10 years ago. It's the foundation of my company. Is it? Eliza leaned forward. That's fascinating, because I have here. She tapped her own tablet, and the large screen at the end of the room lit up. The original source code for an algorithm called Project Daedalus, authored by Dr. Jonathan Reed, my father. Dated 12 years ago. The screen filled with lines of code. On one side, Project Daedalus. On the other, Vance Quantum. They were nearly identical. Anthony's blood didn't just run cold, it froze, solidifying in his veins. You'll note, Eliza continued, her voice the calm of a weather announcer describing a Category 5 hurricane. The syntax is identical. The core logic, identical. The only difference is that you sloppily renamed the primary variables and added a few redundant subroutines to mask the signature. You were always lazy, Anthony. Clara let out a small, strangled gasp. This is a fabrication, Anthony roared, finding his voice in a burst of desperate fury. You did this. You, you're trying to sabotage me. Sabotage you? Eliza actually laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. Mr. Vance, I own you. You see, when my father died, he left everything to me. Not just the house, not just his books. He left me his work, his real work. The work his brilliant, charming protégé, Anthony Vance, swore was just theoretical nonsense. She stood up and began to pace slowly behind her chair. For 10 years, she said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room, I have lived as your quiet, simple, gardening wife. For 10 years, I've watched you spend the money you made from my father's stolen genius. I've watched you belittle me. I've watched you flaunt your indiscretions. She flicked her eyes to Clara, who looked as if she might faint. And all that time, Eliza said, the Reed Foundation wasn't just planting petunias. It was an incubator, a holding company. I used my inheritance, the money you never bothered to look at, to fund dozens of startups. I hired the best minds in tech, the ones who respected my father, and together we built Reed Innovations. We built it with one purpose. She stopped directly behind Anthony's chair. He was rigid, staring at the screen that showed, inarguable, his entire life's lie. We built it, Eliza whispered, leaning close to his ear, to be the company so big, so powerful, that it would one day be in a position to buy your stolen little empire, just so it could tear it apart, piece by piece. Anthony was hyperventilating. This wasn't real. It was a nightmare. The meeting, Mr. Vance, is over, Eliza said, returning to her seat. Vance Cortex core product is built on stolen IP. Reed Innovations will not be entering a partnership. Instead, we will be filing an injunction against your company for intellectual property theft, effective in... Oh, she checked her watch. About 45 minutes. We will also be filing a lawsuit for damages totaling the entire valuation of your company, approximately $2.8 billion. She looked at her board. Mason, Dr. Aris, please escort Mr. Vance and Ms. Decker out. Their presence is no longer required. The elevator ride down from the 90th floor was a silent scream. Anthony stood rigid, staring at the brushed steel doors, seeing only the lines of code, his own theft laid bare. Clara was pressed into the opposite corner, her mascara beginning to trace thin, black lines down her chalk-white face. The moment the doors dinged open on the lobby, she exploded. "You idiot!" she shrieked, her voice echoing in the marble hall. "You monumental, arrogant idiot! She runs a charity? She's simple? That woman just destroyed you. She just destroyed me." "Shut up, Clara," Anthony hissed, grabbing her arm. "Don't you touch me." She ripped her arm away. "All this time, all the promises. We'll be untouchable." "You're not just touchable, Anthony. You're insolvent. Do you know what this does to me? I'm tied to you. I'll be named in the lawsuits." She was right. He hadn't even thought of that. The panic, which had been a cold stone in his gut, now exploded, filling his chest with liquid fire. He couldn't breathe. "It's a lie," he muttered, pushing through the revolving doors into the bright Chicago sunlight. "It's a bluff. She can't prove it." But he knew she could. Eliza was meticulous. The woman who kept spreadsheets for her, garden parties, and cross-referenced seed inventories. Of course, she had kept the receipts. He fumbled for his phone, his driver already pulling the black Bentley to the curb. "Get in," he snarled at Clara. "No." She backed away, holding her purse like a shield. "I'm not getting in that car. That car is probably hers. I'm calling a lawyer. Don't you ever speak to me again, Anthony. You're poison." She turned and fled, a blur of red lipstick and terror, hailing a cab with a frantic, desperate hand. Anthony watched her go, but felt nothing. She was just collateral damage. He got into the car. "The penthouse, Miguel, fast!" The 20-minute drive was the longest of his life. He tried to call his office. His COO, David Smith, wasn't picking up. He tried to call his corporate lawyer, Ben Glass. The line went straight to a pre-recorded message. "The offices of Glass and Fagner are not accepting calls at this time." He knew, with a sickening lurch, that they had already been served. Eliza hadn't been bluffing about the 45-minute timeline. He burst into the penthouse, expecting to find Eliza there, perhaps packing. He would beg. He would rage. He would do something. The penthouse was empty. But not just empty of Eliza. It was sterile. He walked into the master bedroom. His closets were bare. His suits, his shoes, his ties, all gone. He ran to his office. His desktop computer was gone. The awards on his shelves were gone. The safe behind the painting. He tore the Rothko, or the very good copy he'd bought, from the wall. The safe was open and empty. "Eliza!" he roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous, empty space. He ran back to the living room. A single white envelope sat on the massive marble island in the kitchen. His name was written on it in her neat, precise script. His hands were shaking so hard he tore the paper. "Anthony, I assume your meeting did not go as planned. By the time you read this, the injunction will be public, and your board will have been notified of your gross misconduct and foundational fraud. You are probably wondering where your things are. They are in a storage unit in Gary, Indiana. The key is at the bottom of this envelope. I imagine it's more in line with your future prospects. You must be out of the penthouse by 5 p.m. today. At 5:01 p.m., the locks will be changed, and you will be arrested for trespassing. You see, you made a critical error in judgment. Well, many. But this one is my favorite. You always assumed this apartment was yours. You signed the checks. But you never read the incorporation documents. You never read any of the documents I asked you to sign. The Sterling Tower penthouse is not owned by Anthony Vance. It is not owned by Vance Cortec. It is owned by the Chicago Community Development Fund, a primary subsidiary of, you guessed it, the Reed Foundation. You have been paying rent, and I thank you for that, to my company for 10 years. You have been living in my house. The car is also mine. The art is mine. The very chair you're probably leaning on is mine. This isn't a divorce, Anthony. This is an eviction. ER. Anthony's legs gave out. He slid down the kitchen cabinet, the letter fluttering from his numb fingers. An eviction. He looked at the clock. It was 3:42 p.m. He had just over an hour to pack a life that had, it turned out, never even belonged to him. The sheer, diabolical, patient brilliance of her plan was suffocating. She hadn't just built a company to rival his. She had owned his entire life, from the roof over his head to the algorithm in his servers, and he had been too arrogant, too dismissive, to ever even look at the quiet woman making it all happen. He was nothing. He was a ghost in her machine. To understand the scope of Eliza Reid's victory, one had to understand her father, Dr. Jonathan Reid. He was a man of gentle genius, a professor of computer science at the University of Chicago, who cared more for theoretical purity than for profit. He saw code as poetry. His prize student, Anthony Vance, saw it as a weapon. Anthony was charismatic, ambitious, and quick. He'd latched on to Dr. Reid, becoming a surrogate son. He'd met Eliza at a faculty dinner. She was 22, fresh from her own degree in economics, and grieving the recent death of her mother. Anthony was a whirlwind. He was handsome, attentive, and, she believed, he worshipped her father just as she did. They were married within a year. 6 months later, Dr. Reid died of a sudden, massive coronary. Anthony was a pillar of strength. He handled the funeral. He handled the estate. He handled Eliza's grief. And, he assured her, he would handle her father's disorganized professional legacy. "It's all just notes, kitten," he'd told her, boxing up the hard drives and journals from her father's home office. "Academic stuff. Nothing a layman could understand. I'll take care of it. I'll make sure it's all archived properly at the university." Eliza, drowning in grief, had simply nodded. The first crack in the facade appeared 2 years later. Anthony, who had been a mid-level consultant, suddenly announced he was starting his own company, Vance Cortec. His seed product, the Vance quantum algorithm, took the security world by storm. It was impenetrable. It was revolutionary. It made them millionaires overnight. Eliza was proud, but a small, cold seed of doubt had been planted. The name, quantum, was a word her father had used constantly. One night, while Anthony was on a business trip to Tokyo, a trip she would later discover was with his first mistress, Eliza went to the university's digital archive. She searched for her father's work. It was all there, his published papers, his lecture notes. But his personal projects, the ones he'd been working on when he died, they were missing. The archive showed they had been checked out by Anthony Vance 2 years prior, and never returned. She went home and tore their house apart. She was no longer a grieving girl. She was a suspicious wife. In the back of their shared wine cellar, behind a case of 1982 Chateau Margaux that Anthony was saving for a special occasion, she found a locked file cabinet. Anthony had told her it held old tax returns. She broke it open with a crowbar. Inside were not tax returns. They were her father's original journals and hard drives. She spent the next 72 hours locked in the study, cross-referencing her father's handwritten notes with the code for the Vance quantum algorithm, which she, as a majority shareholder, on paper at least, had access to. It wasn't just a theft. It was a digital grave robbing. Anthony had stolen Project Daedalus wholesale. But the worst part, the part that turned her blood to acid, was her father's journal. The last 6 months of his entries were not about code. They were about Anthony. Anthony insists the market isn't ready for Daedalus. He's becoming very forceful, pushing me to license the core logic to him exclusively. He brought me new blood pressure medication today. Said he'd picked it up from the pharmacy for me. So thoughtful. But the pills look different. Had a terrible argument with Anthony. He wants me to sign over the patent rights to his new holding company for protection. I refused. He said I was a fool who would die poor. Chest pains all night. The new pills make me feel dizzy. Anthony said it was normal for the dosage. He's so helpful. Eliza dropped the journal. He hadn't just stolen from her father. He had bullied him. He had stressed him. Had he swapped the pills? Had he killed him? She knew she could never prove that. The body was long since cremated, but she could prove the theft. That night, Eliza Reed died, and Eliza Reed, the CEO, was born. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She went cold. She copied the hard drives. She put the originals back. She used her inheritance, the Reed family money that Anthony found so insignificant, to open a small foundation. It was the perfect cover. While Anthony built his glass tower on a foundation of lies, Eliza, in a rented, nondescript office in a suburban strip mall, began to build her weapon. She funded the real geniuses, the ones her father had respected. She used her maiden name. She operated through shell corporations. She never let her picture be taken. She played the part of the perfect, simple wife. She hosted his dinners. She smiled at his awful jokes. She even tolerated his assistants, each one a younger, brasher version of the last. She endured it all, knowing that revenge wasn't a fire, it was a glacier, slow, inevitable, and capable of grinding mountains to dust. Reed Innovations was that glacier, and today it had finally reached the sea. Anthony Vance, for the first time in his life, was a man without options. He'd ended up at a 2-star Travelodge near O'Hare Airport, the only place that would accept his maxed-out emergency credit card. The storage unit in Gary, Indiana, contained his clothes, dumped in garbage bags, and nothing else of value. He spent 2 days in a panic-fueled haze before he finally found a lawyer who would even see him. Not Ben Glass, of course. This was Mitch Wallace, a man whose office smelled of stale coffee and desperation. His billboard on the highway read, "In a wreck, get a check." "This is a travesty, Mitch," Anthony babbled, pacing the small, cluttered office. "She's stolen my company. She's stolen my life. It's spousal theft. It's fraud." Mitch Wallace, a man with a comb-over and a food-stained tie, looked at the 50-page injunction Anthony had brought. "Mr. Vance," Mitch said slowly, "this document accuses you of fraud. It accuses you of stealing the intellectual property that is your company. It also," he squinted, "names a Ms. Clara Decker as a co-conspirator in an embezzlement scheme, alleging you funneled $1.2 million to her via a shell contract. That's a lie. That was consulting fees." "For what, Anthony? She's a 24-year-old with a liberal arts degree. The feds are going to love this. And that's not even the big problem." "What's the big problem?" "The big problem," Mitch said, "is that you're not just being sued by your wife. You're being sued by your own board. It says here they held an emergency meeting 2 days ago, the one you missed, and voted unanimously to remove you as CEO and file their own suit for breach of fiduciary duty. You lied to them about where the IP came in. You exposed the entire company to this. You're radioactive, Anthony." Anthony's last sliver of hope vanished. He'd always ruled his board through a mix of charm and fear. But Eliza's move had been so total, so absolute, that it had vaporized their loyalty. They were just trying to save themselves. "So what do we do?" Anthony whispered. "We try to settle. We go to her lawyers. We beg for mercy. Maybe she lets you keep a fraction. Maybe you avoid prison." The meeting was set for the following week. It wasn't in a grand boardroom. It was in a neutral grey mediation office. Anthony, in his last clean suit, sat with Mitch. The door opened, and Eliza walked in. She was not alone. She was flanked by 2 men in suits and a woman who looked like she ate lawsuits for breakfast. This was Eleanora Hayes, the most feared corporate litigator in the state. "Mr. Vance," Eleanora began, her voice like gravel, "my client, Ms. Reed, is here as a courtesy. Let's be clear about your position. You have none." "Eleanora, please," Mitch stammered. "My client he's distraught. He's willing to negotiate. A clean divorce. He walks away from Vance Cortec, and she drops the fraud charges. A clean break." Eleanora Hayes actually smiled. It was a terrifying sight. "A clean break," she repeated. She opened a file. "Let's review the breaks. First, the IP theft. We have the original drives, we have the journals, and we have a signed affidavit from your former COO, David Smith, stating that you once bragged to him, and I quote, 'The old man practically gifted me the code before he croaked.' That's a criminal charge, Mr. Vance. Wire fraud, mail fraud. We're looking at 20-30 years. Anthony went numb. David. That traitor. Second, Eleanora continued, the embezzlement. Ms. Decker, in an effort to save her own skin, has provided a full deposition. She's given us every text message, every email. She's agreed to testify against you in exchange for immunity. That's another 10 years. Clara. Of course. And third, Eleanora said, is the company itself. The board has already agreed to a full buyout from Reed Innovations to avoid total insolvency. Vance Cortec no longer exists as of 9:00 a.m. this morning. It has been absorbed. Its assets are being liquidated. So you see, there's nothing to walk away from. Anthony looked for the first time at Eliza. She was watching him, her face impassive. Eliza, he pleaded, his voice breaking. Please, after all the years, don't do this. Don't send me to prison. I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry I cheated. I'm sorry I was an arse. But prison! Eliza leaned forward. For a moment, he saw the woman he'd married. I'm not interested in the cheating, Anthony, she said, her voice quiet. That's a symptom. I'm interested in the disease of your arrogance, the disease that let you steal my father's life's work and build a monument to yourself on his grave. The disease that let you dismiss me as a kitten while I was building an empire. She stood up. But prison isn't the point, she said. My father wasn't a vindictive man. He was a builder. Prison is messy. It creates a martyr. I'm not interested in making you a martyr, Anthony. I'm interested in making you irrelevant. She nodded to Eleanora. My client, Eleanora said, sliding a document across the table, is prepared to offer a settlement. Reed Innovations and the former board of Vance Cortec will drop all criminal charges. In exchange, you will sign this. It's a full confession of the IP theft to be held in trust. You will surrender your passport. You will sign a lifetime, ironclad, non-disclosure agreement. And, she tapped the last page, you will agree to a permanent injunction that bars you from working in the tech, finance, or security industries, in any capacity, anywhere in the world, for life. Mitch Wallace's jaw dropped. That's a professional death sentence. That's the point, Eliza said. You don't go to prison. You just cease to exist. You will live the rest of your life as a nobody. The man you always were, without my father's genius to hide behind. Anthony looked at the paper. Prison or oblivion. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He signed his name, the name that had once graced the top of skyscrapers, and with that signature, He erased himself from the world he had built. Life for Anthony Vance became a series of descending circles. The settlement had not been kind. He was left with nothing but the clothes in his storage unit and a single cashier's check for $50,000, severance, as Eliza's lawyer had called it, and just enough to ensure he couldn't claim destitution. He moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Joliet, a place that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp carpets. The name Anthony Vance was now toxic. The story had been contained. Eliza, ever the strategist, hadn't wanted a messy public scandal. She preferred a quiet, corporate execution. But the tech world was small. The word was out. Vance is untouchable. He's a fraud. He tried to get a job. He couldn't even get an interview as a shift manager at an electronics store. His resume was a black hole. He was too qualified and simultaneously utterly disqualified. He took a job as a dispatcher for a local car service, working the graveyard shift under the name Art Vi. His world shrank to the glow of a computer screen in a tiny, windowless office, routing drivers to drunken pickups. One night, around 3:00 a.m., a call came through from downtown Chicago, a pickup at a high-end restaurant. He recognized the address. It was 2 blocks from the Sterling Tower. A bitter nostalgia made him route the call to himself. He hadn't seen the city he once ruled in months. He drove the black sedan, a Ford, not a Bentley, through the canyons of glass and steel. He pulled up to the curb. A woman was waiting. His blood, which he'd thought had turned to sludge, ran cold. It was Clara. She was not the vision in ruby lipstick he remembered. She was diminished. Her expensive blonde hair was now a mousy brown. She wore a simple black dress, the kind a waitress would wear. She was holding her shoes, rubbing her feet. She got into the back seat without looking at him. "O'Hare, please, and step on it." Anthony adjusted the rear-view mirror. He said nothing. He just drove. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice a gravelly imitation of his old self. Clara looked up, her eyes adjusting to the dark. Her gaze met his in the mirror. Her reaction was not the explosion he'd expected. It was a slow, tired, utterly defeated sigh. "Anthony," she whispered. "My God. Look at you. Look at you," he countered, bitterness welling up. "I thought you'd be halfway to Dubai by now." "With what money?" She laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Eliza's lawyers were thorough. They took the condo. They took the accounts. They took everything. My immunity just meant I didn't get charged. It didn't mean I got to keep the consulting fees. "So what now?" he asked. "I'm a hostess at Cipriani," she said, gesturing back at the restaurant. "The one you use to own a piece of. I seat people who don't even see me. I'm going back to Ohio. My sister's letting me sleep on her couch." An ugly, small part of Anthony felt a flicker of satisfaction. He wasn't the only one who had fallen. They drove in silence for a few minutes, the only sound the hum of the tires on the expressway. "She won so completely, didn't she?" Clara murmured, more to the window than to him. "She didn't just take the money. She took our names. She made us unpeople." "She was always smarter than us," Anthony admitted, the words tasting like ash. It was the first time he'd ever said it aloud. "No," Clara said, shaking her head. "That's not it. It wasn't about being smart. It was about patience. You and I, we wanted everything now. We were sprinters. She was a marathon runner. She was playing a different game. She was playing for legacy." He pulled up to the departures curb at O'Hare. Clara fumbled in her purse, pulling out a crumpled $20 bill. "Keep it, Clara," he said, his voice flat. She looked at him, a long, pitying look that was worse than any hatred. "You too, huh? Back to nothing." She tossed the bill onto the front seat. "Take it, Art. You need it more than I do." She got out, picked up her single, worn-out suitcase and disappeared into the sliding doors of the terminal. Anthony watched her go, a ghost leaving a ghost. He took the $20 bill. He needed the gas. 14 months passed. The vibrant, arrogant, commanding entity known as Anthony Vance was gone, scrubbed from the ledgers of the world he once bestrode. In his place was Art V, a hollow-eyed man who worked the graveyard shift. He was a dispatcher for a third-rate car service operating out of a prefabricated trailer in a muddy lot in Joliet. His world was a 15-inch monitor, displaying a map, his companions the ghosts of drivers he routed through the sleeping suburbs. He was 45, but the mirror, which he avoided, reflected a man of 60, bowed by the gravitational pull of failure. His prison wasn't a cell. It was this suffocating, beige-colored mediocrity. His anger, which had burned like a furnace for the first 6 months, had cooled to a hard, dense slag in his gut. He no longer dreamed of revenge. He no longer dreamed of anything. He thought of Clara, not with longing or hatred, but with a vague, pathetic kinship. He wondered if her couch in Ohio was lumpy. He thought of the $50,000 severance, the bus ticket out of our lives money, as he called it. It was gone, eaten by rent, by car repairs, by the slow, grinding erosion of daily existence. This life was his new normal, until the letter came. It arrived on a bleak, grey Tuesday, a certified letter. In his old life, this meant a contract, an acquisition, an invitation. In this life, it meant only one thing: trouble. A creditor who had found him, a summons, a final legal boot stamping on his face. His hand, chapped and smelling of stale coffee, shook as he signed for it. He sat in his rusted 2009 Honda Civic, the engine pinging in the cold, and tore it open. It was not from a lawyer. It was not from a bank. It was from the University of Chicago Medical Center. The letterhead was heavy, expensive. The message was brief. Miss Eliza Reed has requested your presence. The matter is urgent. A jolt, cold and sharp, shot through him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was recognition. The game, which he thought was over, had one more move. He looked at his watch. His shift started in 2 hours. He called his supervisor, a man half his age named Gary, and for the first time in 14 months, he lied. Family emergency. He drove. He drove through the endless, flat expanse of the suburbs and into the heart of the city, a skyline he no longer recognized as his. He parked in the vast, subterranean garage of the hospital, the same hospital where Dr. Jonathan Reed had died. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. He walked through the sliding glass doors, a ghost returning to the scene of his first crime. The hospital was a temple of technology, clean, bright, and humming with quiet power. It was a world he had once belonged to. Now, he was just a man in a threadbare coat, his shoes squeaking on the polished linoleum. He found the information desk. "I'm here to see Eliza Reed." The nurse glanced at her screen. "Are you family?" Anthony paused. The question was a complex, existential trap. "No," he said, the word tasting like ash. "I'm Anthony." "Ah," she said, her professional smile not wavering. "Mr. Vance. She's in the oncology wing, 7th floor, room 712. Oncology. The word hit him harder than any lawsuit. Cancer. He had imagined 1,000 scenarios for this meeting. Eliza, powerful and gloating from behind a new, larger desk. Eliza, offering him a janitorial job at Reed Innovations out of some twisted sense of pity. He had never, not once, imagined this. Cancer was not logical. It was not part of a plan. It was messy, human, and terrifying. He rode the elevator, his reflection in the steel doors a stranger's face. The oncology wing was quiet, but it was a heavy, weighted silence. He walked down the hall, his footsteps seeming too loud. He found room 7112. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open. The room was large, private, with a sweeping view of the city he had lost. But the view was irrelevant. All that mattered was the bed. Eliza Reed was not the CEO in the teal suit. She was not the simple wife in the beige cardigan. She was a small, pale shape, lost in a sea of white linens and eclipsed by the blinking, beeping machines that crowded the bedside. Her hair, once a sharp, severe bob, was gone, replaced by a soft, downy fuzz. An IV line snaked into her delicate, bruised arm. But then she turned her head, and her eyes, they were the same. They were the eyes from the boardroom. They were the eyes of the architect. "Anthony," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rustle of leaves. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." He stood at the foot of the bed, his cheap coat dripping melted snow onto the floor. He didn't know what to do with his hands. "The letter said it was urgent," he managed, his voice sounding rough and alien. "It is," she said. A small, painful smile touched her lips. "I am terminating my last project." He found the guest chair, a hard plastic thing, and sat. He was a universe away from her. "Eliza, what is this?" "Ovarian cancer," she said, her voice flat, as if reading a financial report. "Stage 4, it's efficient, very aggressive. It seems my mother and I had more in common than I knew." I'm sorry," he said. And to his profound, sickening shock, he realized he was. The hatred he had nursed, his one companion in the dark, suddenly felt childish and irrelevant. He was staring at the only person on earth who truly knew him, and she was dying. "Don't be," she said, her breathing shallow. "It's interesting. I spent a decade building an empire, a fortress of logic and consequence, all to bring you down. And in the end, I'm brought down by a random, chaotic mutation. My father would have appreciated the poetry, I think." "The company?" he asked, simply because it was the only language they both still spoke. "Reed Innovations?" "Secure," she said, a flicker of the old, cold pride in her eyes. "Mason Thorne is CEO. The board is solid. My father's name is on 3 new patents for sustainable energy. His legacy, our legacy, is clean. It's permanent. It will outlive me. And it will most certainly," she looked at him, "outlive you. That's all I ever wanted." They sat in the beeping silence. He was the defeated king, and she was the dying empress. There was nothing left to fight over. The board was empty. "So why am I here, Eliza?" he finally asked, his voice low. "Why call me? For what? To gloat? To watch me watch you? Is this the last twist of the knife?" She turned her head on the pillow. Her eyes, magnified by her frailness, seemed to burn. "Gloat?" she rasped. "No, I'm past that. The board's packed away. I called you here for an ending, Anthony. To close the ledger, I have one last confession." His heart hammered, a sudden, cold panic. "The pills," he whispered, the question that had haunted him, the one thing she'd never been able to prove. "Your father. Did you ever—" "No," she said, shaking her head, a movement that seemed to exhaust her. "I never knew for sure. I drove myself mad for a year, trying to find a pharmacist who would talk, a note, anything. But you were too clever. Or perhaps just lucky." She took a painful, shuddering breath. "And then I realized it didn't matter. The theft of his work was the crime I could prove. The theft of his life, that was a motive. I didn't need it. Your greed was enough." She paused, gathering strength. "No. My confession is about me. After I found my father's journals, after I knew what you were, I died. The Eliza you married, the one who loved you, she was gone. And a new creature was born. A cold thing. A monster, as you once called me. You were, he agreed, the honesty brutal. Yes, she said, I was. I dedicated my life to one single purpose, your utter annihilation. It was a project, just like the Vance quantum algorithm was your project. I became meticulous. I became patient. I became you. Or at least the worst parts of you. And I won. You won, he echoed, a flat statement of fact. I won everything, she whispered. And I'm lying here, plugged into a wall, and I've been thinking. What was the point? I reclaimed his name, but I became something he would have hated. He was a builder. I was a demolitions expert. She fumbled for something on her bedside table. Her hand was skeletal, translucent. She picked up a small, black digital recorder. This is it, Anthony, she said. The last piece. The in case of emergency file. My lawyer, Eleonora Hayes. She's holding the original confession you signed, the one that prevents you from ever working again. But this, she held it up. This is the good stuff. He stared at it, mesmerized. This is the criminal case, she explained, her voice gaining a strange, final energy. This is my full deposition, detailing how I found the drives. This is Clara Decker's testimony, all 3 hours of it. Crying, telling my lawyers about the secret accounts, the trips, the condo in Aspen you promised her. This is David Smith's affidavit, where he states, under oath, that you told him you'd handled my father, and that the old man practically gave you the keys to the kingdom before he croaked. This is everything. Anthony felt his blood turn to ice. That recorder, that tiny piece of plastic, was his life. It was 30 years in a federal prison. My lawyers, she continued, had instructions to release this to the U.S. Attorney's Office the moment you violated your NDA or upon my death. Whichever came first, it was my final checkmate. My dead man's switch. She was holding his entire life in her trembling hand. He could lunge for it, snatch it, destroy it. But he didn't. He was frozen. He was, as he had been for 14 months, a spectator. I'm dying, Anthony, she said, her voice clear. And I'm not forgiving you. I want to be clear about that. What you did to him, to me, it's unforgivable. But I'm not interested in you anymore. Prison. Prison makes you a story. It makes you a headline. It gives you a new identity. It makes you Anthony Vance, the tech felon. It's too much dignity. Her eyes locked on his. I prefer you as Art V, the nobody, the ghost. That is the more perfect revenge. And my father, he wasn't a man of revenge. He was a man of endings, of clean code. This is a loose thread. And then, with a final, surprising surge of strength, she did the last thing he ever expected. She held the recorder over the full glass of water on her bedside table. Eliza, don't, he started, though he didn't know what he was asking. I'm not doing this for you, Anthony, she said. I'm doing it for me. I'm closing the ledger. I'm erasing the project. She opened her fingers. The recorder hit the water with a quiet plop. A few bubbles rose to the surface. It was a sound so small, so anticlimactic, to signal the end of a war. She stared at it, sinking to the bottom of the glass. It's done, she whispered. The original hard drives, they were lost in a vault flood last week. The confession you signed, Eleonora will be instructed to misplace it. Clara is a hostess. David is in Brussels. It's all gone. Just water. You're free, Anthony. She turned her head away, a signal of a final, absolute dismissal. No, she breathed, her eyes closing. That's not right. I'm free. Anthony Vance stood up. His legs felt like wood. He looked at the woman in the bed, the architect of his ruin, the destroyer of his world, and, in the final, incomprehensible act, his liberator. He had hated her. He had feared her. He had, long ago, in another life, loved her. Now, he felt nothing. The fire was out. The ledger was closed. He walked out of the room. He didn't say goodbye. He walked past the nurse's station, his squeaking shoes the only sound. He rode the elevator down, his face in the steel doors, still a stranger's. He pushed through the main doors and into the bright, cold afternoon. The sunlight was blinding. It hurt his eyes. He stood on the sidewalk, cars rushing past, the world loud and busy. He was free. The threat of prison was gone. The name Anthony Vance was no longer a criminal liability. He reached into his pocket. His cheap phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. Gary. Where are you? Shift started 10 minutes ago. Anthony looked at the text. He looked at the skyline. He was free. But he was not Anthony Vance. He was Art V. He had no money. He had no name. He had no skills other than the ones he was forbidden to use. His freedom wasn't a pardon. It was a different kind of prison. The one he had built for himself, the one of irrelevance. Eliza, with her final, brilliant move, hadn't set him free. She had just locked the door from the inside and thrown away the key. He put his phone back in his pocket, turned his collar against the wind, and began the long walk to the bus stop. He had a shift to get to. And so, Anthony Vance, a man who built an empire on theft and arrogance, was left with nothing but the echo of his own lies. He was given a second chance, but what could he even do with it? Eliza Reid, in her final moments, proved that true power wasn't just about winning the war. It was about having the strength to declare the peace. She didn't just reclaim her father's legacy. She finally understood it. But what about that final twist? Was Eliza's last act one of true forgiveness? Or was it the ultimate power move, proving that even in death, she was the one who decided his fate? What would you have done? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you loved this story of karma, consequences, and a twist you never saw coming, please make sure to like this video, share it with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama every single week. Don't miss what's coming next.